Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the dynamic despill technique. So that is the last section here, so the dynamic despill. And I'm just going to do it on the actual comp, and it'll just be easy to explain. So this technique, we're going to disable it after we kind of put it into place, and then we can re-enable it and see where it's going to be useful later on. And you'll kind of see why. So essentially the dynamic despill is, again, when I was teaching you guys despill, I said that you could take the color from the inside and put it on the edge. But the alternative is we can take the color from the outside and put that into the edge as well. So what we can actually do is if we put a dot node here on our foreground, before we've pre-multiplied it, so before we've done this pre-multiply, essentially what we can do is if we take the alpha and we invert the alpha, so I just put an invert node, so our alpha will look like this. Essentially we can take this and we can mask our background. So if we take the background image and we plug that across, so this image is coming into here and plugging in, and we're saying A, mask B. So this character is basically just cutting away from this background. Essentially what we can do is we can take this result and we can plus this over, not an over, but we've set it to plus. And one little thing we need to set is set the output to RGB only. So what this does is, you know, the goal of despill is to contaminate the edge before the pre-multiply with the correct color. So we can either use the foreground color or the background color. And that's exactly what this does. So we're taking the background color and we're contaminating it into the edge. So it's not working so great up here because we have a really bright light. So in our scenario, you know, we might need to fix that first with an edge extend. So for example, if I just enable our temporary edge push, we're going to do a better job with this. This is not a final edge correction, but it's just to show the example. So if I turn that on, we get our normal despill edge extend. And then what we can do, I've done the color corrections in between. So the dynamic despill, you're going to want to put that after any color corrections to your plate. So if we do those little corrections that we talked about with the black fixes and stuff, again, I'm going to kind of redo all these things in a proper way, but this is just a quick example so we can explain the last concept of dynamic despill. So we have these little temporary corrections, and then we're plussing the background kind of onto our picture. So that's kind of bringing in some of those edge colors. And if we look at the result of that and we disable and enable it, you can see it kind of just helps it sit in a little bit more. And this is going to be useful especially because our character in particular is swinging across the frame. So the objects behind the edge are going to change color a little bit. So this is going to help us automatically get some of those edge colors into the inside. So one thing we actually need to do with this is, because this is a plus operation, we don't just want to get the brighter details into the edge. So right now we're getting the nice, you know, brighter edges from behind, which is, if we look at the background image, which is coming in here, you know, we're getting those brighter pieces into the hair. But we also want to get the darker areas. So for example, there might be some areas that, you know, for example, here, the building, if we look at the background, it's actually much darker than what's being plussed. And because this is a plus operation, it's only adding, it's not subtracting from our picture. So what we actually need to do is we want to add the brighter areas, but we want to subtract the darker areas. So what we can do is put a grade here, and you can kind of cheat this effect. So basically you want to turn off the black clamp so that the darker values, we can actually push them negative. So if we sample here in the dark area, we see it's some low values here. But if we take the black point, we start pushing it in this direction, we'll see that those values actually start to turn negative. And if you turn that black clamp off, it makes sure that they can actually go into the negative numbers. The reason we want to do this is because, of course, if you remember back to basic math class, if you plus a negative, it's actually subtracting. So now we're adding the highlight areas and we're subtracting the darker areas. So we can actually subtract away. And now what we can do, you got to be a little careful with the black point method, because sometimes it can saturate a little bit too much the shadows. So sometimes you can reduce the saturation of what you're doing here. You could even get more specific. For example, maybe just this area is too saturated. So you could put a saturation node and, put a roto shape and all the basics of what we know before of how to combine those methods. So we could just take a roto node. Actually, we don't need to make it 4K, so we don't need the reformat anymore because this is after the 2K shift here. So we would just put a roto node and, for example, we would say desaturate that area a little bit, but we're still getting the darkness of it. So those are some things you can do to contaminate the edge. So something else that I'm going to delete the saturation for now, just keep the grade. Something else you can do is you could do a road on the alpha. So this, if we look at the alpha channel, ignore the color here, but we just look at the alpha. We put a filter road here. And essentially what you can do is just, if you want to have the effect go in more, you can. So for example, if we want to kind of push that contamination just a little bit further in, we can kind of shrink that in. Now, you really want to be careful with this because obviously you're kind of, at this point, you're sort of just replacing your image. Like it's not just contaminating, it's sort of, it's really replacing the image. So you got to be really careful with this one. You can push it in a little bit and then maybe create another one and switch it to a Gaussian. So it's like a softer effect being pushed in. But again, you guys want to be careful with pushing this too far, because if you do, you might lose some edge detail in some areas. Now you see this is not an end-all be-all solution. For example, these brighter edges, because we've just done a crappy sort of edge extend here, we need to do something else for this edge because we're having some white halo and stuff like that. But for example, his head, we might be going too soft with this plus effect. So we need to be careful because you still want to see his head. You don't want to make it sort of, invisible. So I'm just going to adjust those roads and we can just see maybe we just need a little bit of that effect and just kind of blur it in on the edge. So if I disable and enable, that's what we're getting. And we can look at the comp of that. And you see that it just helps it sit in maybe a little bit on some of these areas. Again, we can see that some of these areas are a little bit too saturated now, where we've done that minusing effect. So we can go back to our grade and just maybe, adjust that so it's not pushing down so far. Because if we're pushing it too far, we start to kind of break the image. So that's where we would just kind of go in there and look at exactly the level that we need. So that's dynamic despill. That's how you can go around and it will sort of help speed up. It definitely won't do all your edges for you, but in some cases where you have a lot of different colors in the background, we don't want to go around with roto shapes and sort of, have to roto every single despill for every little light, as the character is moving across. That would just take forever. But we still need to do a lot of manual work on this before we fully go into this effect. Like these little white edges we see, we're going to go in there and do a nice edge extends all the way around and key mix them together. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the dynamic despill. I'm going to keep it here in the script and we'll go back and adjust this as we start to go through and properly set up the rest of the edges. But you can see even in areas like this, it kind of helps it not feel so sharp and kind of blending it together. Especially areas like this, that would be a specific roto shape you'd have to do otherwise, but this is kind of doing it automatically. So this is something we might need to manually despill as well. But this is how I go around and check the edges. And some of this, for example, this this dynamic despill is not working so great in this area. So for example, you could of course, you could stencil this off. So you would put a roto shape and you would put a stencil here. And you would just say that you don't want this piece. So you'd go here and just sort of chop that off. So you can, every effect that we do is based on the context of what you're doing. And that's how you should think about this entire class, basically, is I'm giving you tools, but this job requires you to still have some creative problem solving to combine them in different ways. If something doesn't work on one part of your image or it's going too far, it's all a balance. And that's what you're really getting paid to do, honestly, is not just know the techniques, but think about ways to apply them, trial and error, combine things. So that's some advice I would give you. So we're going to go on now to doing the despills properly, but I'm going to label this as the dynamic despill here, just so we can keep in mind where this goes in the script. So dynamic despill. Dynamic despill. And if we go back to our PDF, I think it is. I think we have a PDF somewhere. Yeah, but if you go back to the keying diagram, this is kind of the place that, it makes sense to put this. Again, if you were to put this dynamic despill before the transformation, so for example, if I disable these and I put them here, that's not good because we're scaling up our character, but this scale is also scaling our background. So that's not actually good, because then this is the background details that we're adding to our character are going to scale differently than our actual background. So that's why the scale goes before, and we have that set up like that. So yeah, I'm gonna leave these temporary corrections here for now and leave the dynamic despill here for now. I'll probably enable and disable these as I'm working, and you guys will see my process. But from here on out, the next probably couple videos will be me just applying the techniques we've learned. You can watch them if you want, or skim through them. The reason I'm saying that is I just don't want to waste people's time repeating things. But I think that some people will appreciate watching me do my process throughout. So yeah, that's what we're going to do in the next couple ones. And then we'll do some new techniques at the end as well. If you pay attention to the lecture titles, that'll help also if you're looking for new pieces of information versus just watching me do my process. So that's yeah, pretty much it.